Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Travel Podcast, brought to you by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Staci, and today we're doing something a little different in that we're not talking about one location specifically. We're rather talking about a traveling experience. So a few episodes ago, I talked about Martha's Vineyard, which is sort of known as this playground of the rich or what have you. And that's sort of the thought process, I guess, I have in my head of East Coast summers. And clearly I'm only above a certain latitude because summers in the South are a bit different. But I tend to want to think of East Coast summers as just like summers on the coast in places like Martha's Vineyard, even though I have been to Massachusetts in the summer and it was very hot and humid and I didn't like it. So, but we were not on the coast. So I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and assume it's nicer on the coast. So I was quite excited when I discovered that there are Canada, New England cruises. So there are a number of cruise lines that do this where you go to different places sort of up along the coast. So you are hitting places both in New England and in Canada, and you can find these with sort of main name cruise lines like Royal Caribbean. Caribbean. I don't know why I just made that a verb. Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, Princess, but you can also find this with smaller lines such as Windstar, Regent Seven Seas, Seabourn, etc. So the itineraries can probably vary from cruise line to cruise line, but there are a number of places that they all do kind of tend to hit more or less. And so we're going to talk about those today. But do be aware that cruise itineraries, and I think this is just any cruise you go on ever, can change if, the weather does not cooperate or other things that might happen. So the site I found this article about the Canada New England cruise starts in Newport, Rhode Island, where you can walk the cliffs. And these are sprawling mansions that were once quote unquote summer cottages for the rich. A bit like Martha's Vineyard, I guess, though I don't know that they have the very interesting history of A, emphasis on privacy, and B, everybody signed that Martha's Vineyard had. The northern part is paved and accessible for people in wheelchairs, but then other parts are rockier, narrower, and more challenging. So you probably do want to wear good walking shoes. And if you have mobility issues, just keep that in mind. Then they go to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And this is very pretty. It almost reminds me of when we talked about Venice, because it is actually styled to look like a Venetian palazzo with a central courtyard with flowers. And this was created to house all the paintings, furniture, tapestries, and sculptures that this evidently very eclectic woman had collected. You then move to Camden, Maine, and this is Mount Batty, which is just sort of a great name because it feels almost a little silly. And I'm sure that's not the history of it, but it feels sort of like something you'd make up to tell your child a story of, oh, and then they went to Mount Batty and blah, blah, blah. It feels kind of cute to me. But anyways, at Mount Batty in Camden, there is a 1.2 mile nature trail that you can hike up. But if you're not a big hiker, or if like the previous place where you had some of those mobility issues, you can also actually drive to the summit. So you're not limited just to hiking. And ships that stop at this location usually also give you the time to sort of explore downtown Camden. So this could be a good time to just sort of take a leisurely stroll, see the shops, actually get beyond just nature and into town city life. And while you imagine that leisurely stroll, we're going to take a short break, so stay tuned.
Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast, dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast, where we are talking about a cruise through Canada and New England. And when we left off, we were taking a leisurely stroll in Camden, Maine. Then this article moves on to, we're still in Maine, but the Acadia National Park. And this has 45 miles of broken stone carriage roads used by bikers, horses, and pedestrians. And I would want to just do you rent a horse? I don't even know. Go on a horse ride along this and feel, being in Maine on a broken stone carriage road on a horse that it's like 1700 something. And then like my cell phone would go off and remind me that it's not. But to have that sort of not even old world, because this is America and this is technically the new world, historical, not pioneer, pilgrimage feel. Clearly, I don't know the word, but you know what I'm talking about. That idea that, when you think of fall and you think of the leaves, I'm from Northern California, so our weather throws that off a little. And so I tend to think of like Northern New England, and that takes me to older ideas. I don't know why. I'm a little strange. So anyways, this article moves on to Montreal, which I mentioned in a previous episode because I'm so wanting to go just to almost anywhere in Quebec. I need to get over that, or go get a new passport and just go. Yeah, let's go with that one. That'll be the plan. So anyways, Montreal evidently is actually very popular with foodies, which I didn't know. And of course, wouldn't know because I'm about as opposite from a foodie as you can get. I'm very picky, so I don't care too much about foodie places. But I also kind of want to go to foodie places just because I'm like, if anywhere there was food to change my mind about things I think I don't like, it would have to be at like a foodie paradise because they actually care enough about food. So I should theoretically there be able to get the best version of, I'm going to go with shrimp. I don't like shrimp. The best version of shrimp prepared perfectly to be like, now I see why people like this. That's my not at all plan. It has not been put into place yet, so I do not know if that would actually work. But because Montreal is popular with foodies, many of the cruise lines offer their own culinary tours, but you can also book your own separately. And one of the very popular ones is the 2.5-hour Flavors of Old Montreal walking tour. This includes samples of macarons, foie gras, artisanal cheese, and ice cream flavored with maple syrup, which feels, again, less French and more 1700s New England. I have no idea if that's a regional thing. I've never heard of ice cream with maple syrup, but it just feels that area of the world there. Moving on, it then goes to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where there is a Maritime Museum of the Atlantic because, not quite fun fact, but interesting fact, even though the Titanic was set to go into New York, many of the deceased from the Titanic were actually recovered by Canadian ships, and they were then brought to Halifax. So there is, a lot about the Titanic in that museum. And it's also located near the Fairview Lawn Cemetery, where more than 100 of the Titanic passengers were buried. And I always think it's very interesting to go to museums, not just about historical places or eras in general, but especially about specific things, because those exhibits tend to get more detailed than something that's just like 1700s France. So it's you really get sort of immersed in the experience, I find, when I go to more specific museum exhibits. From there, it goes to the Bay of Fundy. I'm going to call that Fundy, though again, like Mount Batty, this kind of sounds like something you just make up in a children's story. From there, they sailed to the Bay of Fundy, where they played games all night long. Something. But the Bay of Fundy is actually evidently very good for whale watching. They suggest that even though you can spot whales anytime between June and October, so again, this is all for me about summer. These cruises probably do run for the rest of the year, but I am not sure I want to be then on the New England coast in like winter. I'd probably be freezing because, again, Northern California, and not the mountains of Northern California. But anyways, even though you can see the whales anytime between June and October, the best time to go is August for that. You then go, depending on your itinerary, but definitely in this article, to Prince Edward Island. And for those of you who recognize the name, that is famous for Anne of Green Gables. It's also actually where Ellen Montgomery grew up. And so the stop usually features places like Charlottetown, and Green Gables Heritage Place, which is the farm that inspired Marilla and Matthew's home. I'm not sure. I somehow managed to not read Anne of Green Gables. I don't know how that worked. I just never as a child read it. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Anyways, from there, it moves on to Quebec City. And I feel that has to be sort of, I'm going to totally go with the very smart assumption that I don't know Canadian geography well enough to say where that is. So I'm not sure how, roundabout this itinerary that the article is giving. But I did speak in a previous episode, I think it was one of the very early episodes, about Quebec City, because again, I just want to go to Quebec and clearly need to take a 5-year sojourn and go there. I don't know. But actually, I believe in Quebec City, I talked about the historicalness of the city and, how old it is. But it's also known for, we call them Native Americans, but I think in Canada they use First Peoples or something. But so you can actually go to Quebec City and visit the Aboriginal Wendake. I do apologize if I butchered that name. To view artifacts like headdresses, as well as learn about the Huron-Wendat people and their myths and legends, including visiting a 18th century church dedicated to the first Native American saint. You can also walk through a traditional longhouse. And I think it's very interesting, and I'm sure we must have these some places in America outside of places that do, sort of Mayflower reenactments or whatever. But I don't know of too many sort of Native American places to visit that, you know, still have like the history and not like just a reservation, but have the I don't know what I'm trying to say. Not an exhibit exactly, but have this set up that it's not just people living there, but you actually can come and learn about those people. I'm sure, again, I know we must have them somewhere, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. And then finally, still in Quebec, and I don't know if that we're all in Quebec, but I totally would not mind just having I don't think you can do a cruise throughout all of Quebec, but a whatever you would do throughout all of Quebec. We're still in Quebec. This is Gasp. I want to say Gaspé, but again, if it's Quebec, I kind of want to assume it's French, and you wouldn't pronounce that final E. It's Gaspe. However you pronounce that, I do apologize, people of Quebec. But this has North America's largest migratory bird sanctuary and is a breeding ground for 200,000 ganets. I'd want to see this just because I imagine it probably looks really pretty to be a breeding ground, but I'm also kind of terrified of the birds because I have seen the birds, and also these look like slightly more colorful seagulls, and seagulls were definitely involved in the birds, but also I went to UC Berkeley where it felt like the seagulls, the crows, and the squirrels were all either A, larger than normal, and or B, not terrified of humans at all, and totally coming up to you if they think you have food, which again just brought up fears of the birds. And so I'm like having sort of things of like 200,000 of those not quite seagulls. Yes, but no, I don't know that I could do that. That worries me. So we're going to take a short break. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Travel Podcast. I know while I was talking about the cruise that I mentioned several times this article, without saying specifically what that article was or where I found it, but that was because the site where I found it is actually the site for today, and we're going a little out of order in that I'm going to talk about the site first and then tell you the tip. So the site is smartertravel.com, and I've actually used smartertravel.com to research a number of the episodes I've done. I really like this site. I like the way it's set up and most of the things they write that I've checked out. This site has a lot of articles and tips about travel, but also sort of travel news and things going on in travel. So it'll write about airlines that are having problems or things sort of in the news beyond the things that make it onto the nightly news, but things that travelers would probably really want to know of. This airline's struggling, this airline has a new CEO, etc. It also talks about the TSA, the FAA. I don't know why I wanted to put another A in there. So it feels like such a wonderful resource for not only people planning travel, but people just interested in travel. almost sort of the 21st century, I guess, of armchair travelers, but it's not, people's travel memoirs, but you do get to learn a lot about different places, and they write in an interesting way a good amount of time. This is actually a member of the TripAdvisor family, and TripAdvisor was the site on one of our earlier episodes. And it is a 2-time winner of, I'm just going to spell out this acronym, NATJA's Best Travel Website Award. Travelers, I'm sure know what that is. So, yes. And then the tip for today, and if you're easily made anxious, I would say, well, thanks for listening to this episode, and I hope to see you next time. And you should probably just stop listening for now, because this tip comes from my somewhat anxiousness for traveling. I don't travel too much, as you know, because a lot of these episodes are my imaginary travels, most likely with my imaginary lovers. Not that this affected me, but I just thought it was interesting. I, for a while, did not fly. I had flown about a month before 9/11, and then I didn't fly again until early 2013. And that's not because I was afraid of flying. That was just because I didn't end up going anywhere. But so when I came back to flying in 2013, I was kind of freaking out because I'm like, 9/11 happened after the last time I was on a plane. And also I was quite young when that happened. I haven't been on a plane. Sorry if you hear the dogs barking. I haven't been on a plane in clearly, nearly a dozen years. And I know things are different. And I wasn't an adult when I was last on a plane. So I probably got a little leeway for being a child and not knowing what I was doing. How do I do this? I don't know what to do. And also just flying in general. And even though your chances of being killed in a plane crash are ridiculously lower than being in a car accident, it's like 1 in 96,566 versus 1 in 112. Like, we don't think about that. We get in cars every day and we feel just fine and it's perfectly safe. But people, and I'm one of them, will get kind of nervous when you go flying, probably because it's not an everyday thing. If we were, as I'm sure something in the past thought we'd be at by now, flying every day to work from one country to the other, it would probably be nothing. It would be like getting on a bus or getting on a subway. But because it's such a rare thing, can get nervous. I like to, since I can't control everything, research as best I can and figure out, all that I can do and then try and relax from there. So I, of course, have looked up a number of times, where should I sit on a plane to be safest? Again, ridiculously low chances, especially compared to car accidents, but anxiety is not rational. So the safest part of the plane to sit in case of a crash is usually in the rear section. And researchers have done a number of things on this. And again, they only have so many plane crashes to study because your chances are really, really low. So some of the sample sizes that they used were not huge. But based off of the sample sizes, numerous studies have found that usually the survival rate is highest in the rear section for a plane crash unless strange factors start getting involved. And I saw this one rather, okay, you're making a statement image, which had basically, you could see the seating plan of a plane, and it had it in colors of red, yellow, green, and then it had sort of your percentage of surviving. But I did also read a book that was talking sort of about this, about people who survive things, and said that in case of, needing to get out of the plane quickly, those who are within like 4 rows of the emergency exits had greater chances of survival. So I always try and sit in the back half, but still towards the front of the back half. So I'm like within 4 rows of the main emergency exit over the wings. Again, to calm myself down, have to be like, have I done everything I can possibly do? And then just leave the rest in fate, life, what have you's hands. So I take the things of, okay, I want to sit in the rear, but I want to be near the emergency exit. They also suggest being on an aisle seat as opposed to a window seat, because then you don't have to, crawl over other people. But I don't like aisle seats. So I often do still want a window seat, just because I don't know why, because then I always feel bad when I have to get up and go to the bathroom and step over these people I probably don't know. But somehow I just don't want an aisle seat. Although I have never done a majorly long transatlantic flight. And if I did do that, I've heard that you probably should get an aisle seat, just because you're sitting for a long time and you're on an airplane, and that has a whole thing with your circulation. So you should get up and walk at times. And that is, of course, much easier to do when you're actually already on the aisle than if you have to be oh, excuse me, oh, pardon me, oh, I'm sorry, 3 or 4 times to get up simply to walk, not even to go to the bathroom. They'd probably give you the stink eye. So if you, like me, feel a bit nervous about flying, just know, A, your chances of being killed in a plane crash, very low. I don't want to be like a fearmonger here, but you do take a higher chance just getting in the car on the freeway. But then B, rear, but within 4 aisles of the emergency exits and on the aisle, sort of your safest bet for being totally okay. I do apologize. I know that wasn't a very upbeat thing. So to be more upbeat, I would say go back and listen to My Quebec City. And just imagine me or you or whoever gives you joy to imagine with their interimaginary whatever lover here, wherever you would like to be. And then imagine that we will one day get to what, again, something else has already said we should have, of just being able to teleport to where we're going and not have to do the flying. And that would be wonderful. And on that imaginary note, thank you for listening to the GSMC Travel Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From travel to health and wellness to entertainment and life and happiness to sex and relationships. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast.